Before we start, first of all, I would like to welcome Representative Brown back. And I think we're going to start off with Mr. Dudich.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know I've got 30 minutes, but I'm not going to take all 30 minutes. I'm fine with 5. First of all, let me thank the committee for its patience in getting materials out for today's meeting. We typically have a 48-hour time period in which we provide materials to the committee so they have time to review it. Unfortunately, one of the documents that is included in your packet is a transmittal letter, and several of the agencies that are presenting to you today were not able to get those documents back to us in a timely manner so that we could send them to you 48 hours in advance. So on behalf of the budget agency, I do apologize to the committee for the tardiness of today's materials. We are corrected in terms of our next few meetings, and we've sent out the materials for tomorrow's meeting within the 48 hours, and we'll send out materials on the 10th and the 17th in 48 hours. So let me apologize to the committee members and the staff for that delay. We were ready to go. We were just waiting on some other people, and as we all know, waiting on other people sometimes makes the overall process delayed. So thank you for your patience. Also, before I go into a little bit of the preview, I'd like to thank the staff at the budget agency for the great work that they've been conducting over the last half of a year. This is a long process and takes a lot of meetings and discussions and dialogue with state agencies and directors and commissioners. And want to thank the budget analysts, the assistant directors, and the deputy directors for the work that they have done over these almost last half year in putting together the budgets, meeting with agency heads and agency fiscal staff, and working behind the scenes to prepare the documents and information that you'll review today, tomorrow, the 10th and the 17th. So just a point of personal privilege to thank the staff of the budget agency. They do a great job, do a lot of work to prepare for this and going into session. So thank you, members of this budget agency staff. My goal today was to just preview what you'll be hearing today and over the next few weeks in terms of budget presentations. This process started in our office in April 2018 with the development of the State Budget Agency's biennial budget instructions. Deputy Director Zach Jackson and his team put those together and working collaboratively with agency staff to develop those instructions. Those are the starting point for agencies to develop and submit their budgets to the budget agency for consideration during the biennial budget process. We did release those instructions in early June to state agencies. Some of the highlights from those instructions included the base in which agencies were starting out their biennial budget request. We always set a base in terms of a starting point for state agencies to request budgets, and we used the 2018 spending levels as the starting point of the base for the biennial budget. There were a few exceptions to that, and many of you are familiar with it. DCS, K-12, spending, Medicaid, pensions. Certain line items, obviously, we needed to make adjustments that didn't start at the 2018 spending level, and we'll talk about those as we go through the process and as you see those reports. But for a majority of the state agencies that are presenting before you today, the 2018 spending level was the starting point for requested budgets. In addition, as always, state agencies were permitted to request additional funds above and beyond the base. Some areas that are specific to that you'll hear as a theme throughout the next few meetings is one, an adjustment in their budget for pay-per performance and health insurance increases, fleet needs throughout the state agencies, as well as any new mandates or new requirements of state agencies that were results of state law or federal law changes. From July through August, the state budget agency staff worked closely with agency fiscal staff and leadership in state agencies to develop the 2020 and 2021 biennial budget request, working through multiple scenarios, looking at fund balances, personnel costs, to ensure the timely submission of budgets by the state mandated September 1st, 2018 deadline. This allowed our staff to work closely with state agencies during the development of those budgets so they had a firm understanding of budget submissions as the state budget agency reviewed those requests. Agencies, again by state law, were required to submit budgets to the budget agency by September 1st, and we began working through those documents as well as developing the reports you'll see today, the transmittal letters that you have hopefully had a chance to read over, as well as agency presentations. During this time, I'm working closely with the agencies, again, thanking them for their work, but also the state agencies that worked with our analysts in order to prepare for these budget presentations. This process started in September and has gone all the way through today and will proceed on through the next 5 months as we work on these presentations. The information provided to you is what has been worked through with the budget agency and the state agencies in terms of what their request will be, but we understand this is the start of a process. As the state budget agency developed agency requests and as agencies worked on their budgets, we focused on 4 specific themes and goals that the governor asked us to specifically focus on going into this biennial budget. The first was to have a balanced budget for both years of the biennium, and we mentioned that that's a part of now the law as the balanced budget amendment was passed in November. Secondly, maintaining our AAA credit rating. Third, maintaining a $1.8 billion reserve roughly, and keeping our reserves as a percentage of spending at or above 11%. These 4 key goals were things that we kept in our minds and repeated to the agencies as we looked at their budgets, reviewed their budgets, and what's being presented to you today and over the next several weeks. What you will hear today and throughout this month is the start of a long process that many of us have been through. We will have better insight to the budget not only during our December 17th meeting when we have a revenue and Medicaid forecast update, but we'll have more information in April when we receive an updated forecast on revenue and Medicaid spending. I would remind the members of the committee that this is a start of a long and deliberative process, and much discussion will occur over the next 5 months on the budget, its priorities, funding levels for programs, and look forward to those discussions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions for Mr. Dudich? Senator Taylor.
Actually, either one of you can answer this. Jason, have you got these documents, looks like late August, September. Have you gone over any of the budget requests with the chair of the committee?
No, sir. It's all been internal with the state budget agency, and this is that part of the process where those agencies will come forth. Several issues obviously are more public, the DCS needs, what will be funded in K-12 and Medicaid, but specifically going through any of the documents, this has all been an internal process to the budget agency and those state agencies as we proceed into these hearings, Senator.
So what you're saying is no one, including your fiscal analyst for the majority, has seen the request prior to today?
Not to my knowledge, Senator.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All right. I don't see any, so we're going to get started with the retirement in-purse. Steve.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Steve Russo. I'm the Executive Director of the Indiana Public Retirement System. It is my duty to try to do this within 30 minutes to keep you at least ahead of schedule. I know you have a very busy day. Before you is a very large slide deck of about 60 slides. These are slide deck that was vetted in more detail with the recent meeting of the Pension Management Oversight Committee this past September. Today my intention is just to do a subset of those slides, hit the highlights, particularly those that impact most the state budget. And it's also a reminder, I think given the issues that you're probably going to be dealing with, hopefully pensions isn't one of them for this year, but it was 10 years ago that I was here for the first time, having just come into the job, trying to explain the consequences of about $8.5 billion coming out of the portfolio due to the market crash. And so a lot has happened since then, and I believe that we are in a great position today of strength for today as well as the future. So with that, slide 2, just a reminder of, in totality, what it is that IMPERS manages today. In aggregate, we're now up to $34 billion of assets. We serve approximately 470,000 members across state, local units of government. And we have relationships and collect contributions and help employees across a broad base of over 1,200 separate and unique employers. We're comprised today of 8 different defined benefit retirement plans. We now have 3 separate defined contribution retirement funds. I'll talk about a little bit of a change here in a moment with respect to that. And then we also manage 2 smaller non-retirement funds, one being the local public safety pension relief fund, which is somewhat of a sizable appropriation I'll talk about in a moment. And then we manage a small, what is now a consolidated special death benefit fund. I think there was 2 to 3 separate unique ones up to a couple years ago, and legislation consolidated those into a single fund. So if I had to just summarize everything as of through the last fiscal year in one slide, this would be the one slide. We believe that we still remain in great shape, well-funded. The contribution rates that we expect to see for Turf 96 and the 77 fund, which are the predominantly big funds at which contributions are paid as a % of payroll by employers, we don't anticipate to see that increase at least through 2020. There's a lag and a lead in the way that we do our work, so essentially the board just recently met this last October and set those contribution rates out for through 2020, and essentially those contribution rates remain flat. As you talk about what might be increasing across different agencies' budget needs, whether it be increases in healthcare, other needs, there will not be a separate increase in the percentage required to support pensions from the employers, including state agencies. The estimated aggregate funded status of our pre-funded plans increased from 84% up to a little over 88%, which is great news. I'll talk a little bit later. This is a little bit out of the norm for what other states are experiencing, but through a number of things that we're proactively managing here within the state of Indiana, many of them with Indiana General Assembly, proud to say that our funded status has gone up. One of the big drivers for that increase is that there was a significant bill this past session, Senate Enrolled Act 373, that had to do a lot with how COLAs and 13th checks or any post-retirement benefit increases are going to be paid for going forward. I'll talk about that in just a little bit more detail in a couple moments. But that was a significant change, and because of that mechanism, that had a significant reduction in our liabilities to the plan, which was one of the major drivers for our funded status increasing. The third bullet there was more of an accounting change, but I just wanted to bring it to the committee's attention. In the past, because of IRS and accounting rules, the defined contribution accounts for perf and turf members, which were called annuity savings account or ASA accounts, that may be familiar for members of the fund. Those were accounted for and included as part of the total defined benefit plan from an accounting perspective. And because of a number of recent changes that took place both in the policy as well as at the IRS, those are now, as of going back to actually January 1st of this last year, those will now be reported and as completely separate, distinct defined contribution plans. So I think it'll make it easier for all stakeholders to clearly better see and understand the delineation between the defined benefit obligations and the defined contribution obligations going forward. I have a couple slides in a few moments that'll get into the Teacher Pre-96 plan. In my opinion, it remains stable, steady as you go, no significant change to the forecast and the plans that we've seen in recent years. And we believe that we continue to make great progress and strive towards providing outstanding customer service to our members. We engage in a lot of benchmarking exercises, and I have a slide to summarize that in a few moments. So that's the last fiscal year in a nutshell. So the remaining slides will just be kind of delving into a little bit of the details somewhat. So on slide 4 is just kind of a snapshot to get a feel for the magnitude of the monies that come in and out of our plan. In our last fiscal year, our net assets increased by 7%. As a reminder, the increase in net assets is not the same as the investment return because your net asset growth takes into account cash flows, which is what you show below. So we had started the year at roughly $31.8 billion. We collected $2.5 billion of contributions. We collected $2.8 billion in investment income, which is a 9.3% return on our investments over that fiscal year. And then we had money going out the door of $2.9 billion. So the net position that we ended up at the end of last year was at $34.2 billion. This is an eye chart. This gets into the funded status of all the separate and unique plans across NPERS. A couple funds that I'll just make attention to towards kind of the middle is the 77 fund. That's the fund for public safety firefighters and police officers as of 1977. That fund remains above 100% funded. And then the fund right above it, the Teachers 96 plan, which is different from the pre-96 plan. That Teachers 96 plan is a plan that's for teachers that were hired after 1995. The school districts pay a percentage of payroll as those teachers work to support those future pension obligations. We are now up to 98.5% funded in that plan and closing in on 100% funded. On an aggregate basis for all the pre-funded plans, as I mentioned earlier, we are now at 88.3%, an envy of many in the nation. But then you have the separate unique plan, which is the Teachers Pre-96 plan that has a low funded status, but it's by its very definition meant to be low because it was set up and established as what's called a pay-as-you-go plan. In other words, you pay benefits and put money into the plan as the benefits become due. Almost by definition, its funded status would be zero. But due to actions taken by the legislature back when the reform took place in 1996, they established the Pension Stabilization Fund to start to put monies into that fund with, my understanding, the primary purpose to bring stability to the growth of what would need to be appropriated from the state budget to support that plan. And I'll have a slide here in a moment to explain that a little bit further. This is a new slide to the deck that hasn't been seen. I thought it was, I wanted to step back because I think sometimes some people can kind of lose sight as to what belongs to the state, and you have all these local units of government that participate in NPERS. And so I just had the team create just a simple pie chart. The one to the left is just a simple split of the accrued liabilities of all of our plans put together. This is not the unfunded liabilities, this is the total liabilities. So across all of our plans, there's a total liability order of magnitude of close to $40 billion. If you take a look at of those total liabilities, what belongs to the state versus what belongs to all the local units of government, the local unit of governments actually hold now a majority of the liabilities across all of our plans. 52% of the liabilities are in the hands of local units of government. So just as a reminder, as we do and always do here, contemplate policy and so forth when it comes to pension, that what's decided here for the state can potentially have a significant impact on local units of government that participate in our plans. On the right side is a pie chart that divvies out the contributions between state and local units. I purposely split the state piece here into two pieces, a blue and a green. The blue represents what is directly appropriated in the state budget. So you'll see line items in the state budget that will get you up to about $1.1 billion. The green, the 0.4, represents the all other because there are other contributions that come into us, for example, as a percent of state payroll for employees who work in state agencies. Those monies are not directly appropriated in the budget. You appropriate monies to the state agencies to operate, and from those funds that they contribute to us. And so it's the sum total of all those different buckets of money, even including the lottery proceeds that come to us, that make up that $0.4 billion. And then you have local units of government today contributing close to $1 billion. What you're going to see over time is that you're going to see the pension contribution over time start to look like the liabilities because you have the Teacher Pre-96 plan. That plan has a lot of liabilities for those teachers that are in local school districts, but those liabilities and those payments come from the state. So as fewer members are in that plan and more teachers become part of the newer plan, you're going to see that accrued or the contribution start to shift from the state to the schools. The next slide is just to, it's another number slide, just to try to reconcile and show what happened with the unfunded liabilities through the course of last year. So we had started in aggregate with total unfunded liabilities of a little over $16 billion. That next line item is what the actuaries would have expected it to change by, because we do expect, if we hit all of our assumptions, that we are slowly eating away at the unfunded liability. So we would have forecasted and believed that we would have gained on our unfunded liabilities by $222 million across our normal course of business and hitting all the assumptions, which would have taken us to an expected unfunded liability at the end of the year of close to $16 billion. And then below that, you see the things that are positive and negatives versus what we had expected to happen. Our investment return number was, on a 5-year basis, slightly below what we had expected. From an actuarial perspective, it's the 5-year return number that has the most meaning because we smooth out an average our investment returns over a 5-year time horizon for the purposes of the actuarial work. However, that was offset by a very significant reduction in liabilities brought forth by Senate Enrolled Act 373, and those liabilities went down by close to $1.7 billion. We also had a couple other smaller gains. We collected slightly more than what we had expected in contributions driven by our funding policy to the tune of about $100 million. And then there's, I call it all the others. One thing that people always need to remind people, a lot of people want to pick on pensions because they make all these rosy assumptions and projections, which is maybe true in some cases, but what the actuaries do is each and every year they true up what they assumed was going to happen in that year versus what actually happened that year. So there's always that annual true up that takes place, all the pluses and minuses of all the different things that they do. And in this case, the actual experience, in this case, which is a gain to the plan of $167 million. I'm always astounded by how accurate the actuaries can get with all the projections because they typically, after all is said and done, are under less than 0.5% in accuracy of what they assume versus what actually happens through the course of any one given year. The next slide is another eye test, but this is a slide that's intended to show you for all of the other different all of our different funds to segregate in one column what is appropriated directly from the general fund across all of the different funds. The second column for each of the time periods is I'll call all other. That's all those local units contributing in and or other dedicated sources of funding that come into the pension plans. And so if you go to the very bottom and net everything out, if you look at the general fund appropriation number for the budget, you'll see going back to FY18 actuals, we were at what, $1.054 billion. We are forecasted to come in at fiscal year 19 at 1.076, which is a modest under 2% growth. And then you get into 2020, which is we're forecasting and submitted to the budget office 1.079 million. However, I will make one footnote to these numbers. You will notice for FY18 and FY19 that there were small buckets of incremental appropriations that were made for 13th checks. For the purposes of what we've submitted and presenting in here today, we did not anticipate any monies today or assume any monies for that in our appropriations forecast. We know that will be an ongoing discussion of policymakers going forward, but I just wanted to point out that difference in the forecast versus the past versus what we have submitted to the budget agency. So essentially what you have, I think Jason introduced about everything keeping flat except for a couple exceptions, pensions being one of them. Within Indiana state law, there's a built-in increase that takes place with the teachers pre-96 plan. It's a statutory number that's set. I believe the statute actually calls for a 6% growth year over year. But it gives discretion to the governor to submit a budget that can be less than that 6% number as long as we can validate that we believe that that projected going forward that is enough to fully fund that plan. And so we've effectively been operating on a 3% growth of those appropriations for I think the last 3 or 4 budget cycles. And that is what's represented in what we've shown here today. Everything else that is appropriated is predominantly flat. The other second biggest line item is that pension relief fund at the bottom. As a reminder, during one of the more recent property tax reforms in which the state put property tax caps in place, it's my understanding as part of that arrangement that the state picked up paying for the pensions of all the legacy older public safety plans that existed prior to the 77 fund. And so NPERS acts as a pass-through. We provide to the budget agency what we think the needs of all the local units are to make those payments through the course of a year. The state appropriates that, and then we work with each local unit to understand what actually got paid out and true them up at the end of the year. We have a process that goes forth that polices and monitors that money that goes out to them. That fund, the appropriation for that now is at $145 million in what we reflect here. The next slide I could spend an hour at least on, but I'm obviously not going to today. This gets into Senate Enrolled Act 373 that established what are called supplemental reserve accounts for not all of our funds, but for PERF, the TURF Pre-96, TURF 96, the Excise Gaming and Officers, and the Legislators Defined Benefit Plan. And so previously, the legislature decided what it is, that, if anything, that they wanted to grant on an ad hoc basis. And unless there was money separately appropriated in the budget, whatever money was needed to pay for those just came out of the assets of the fund. Going forward, the process is still ad hoc in terms of the legislature having the ability to decide what, if anything, to grant. However, what can be granted can only be what is now going to be available in these separate accounts that are going to have a separate funding mechanism to it as far as what we charge the employers to pay into. And so the way the bill was set up, it established these reserve accounts as of July 1st of this last year. Monies will start to flow into those over the next budget cycle. And the next budget cycle, I or somebody will be before you to tell you, here's how much are in these buckets, from which you can decide what, if anything, you want to pay out of those buckets for 13th checks or COLAs. So I know one of the considerations that we'll be working through during this next budget cycle is, well, what to do about this budget cycle. And so this is a little bit of that no man's in between land, between, I'll call it business the way it used to be and the new thing. And so I know there'll be discussions, I'm sure, about what, if anything, to do. And I know that we'll stay in close contact with those in the General Assembly. We just want to be sure that however that is crafted, particularly in the language, that it doesn't create any conflicts or issues with what the language in Senate Enrolled Act 373 is. For example, should you decide to put money or want to grant something, do you just grant it separately out of some separate thing? Do you tell us to spend it out of the assets? Or do you direct us to spend it out of what may or may not be already in these reserve accounts during this next 2-year time period? So we just want to be mindful that we communicate closely that once you decide, or should you decide that you want to do something, that we want to pay particular attention to the mechanics of exactly how that happens. Take a couple moments and talk about investments over the last year. As I mentioned earlier, we returned 9.3% for the fiscal year, which is slightly above on a one-year basis our target of 6.75%. A reminder, our long-term target is that. It's a long-term target meant to represent what we think the assets will return over the life of the duration of the liabilities, which is typically 30-plus years. We know and understand that there are near-term risks to that number in the short term, and that's baked into how we're managing and tilting the portfolio. And one of the big risk mitigators to that is our funding policy, in which we have decided that we will not reduce contribution rates that employers pay into the plan until the funds are first at least 105% funded and at least what the actuaries determine. And effectively what you've had the last couple of years is that what the employers have actually been paying in, which has been that flat rate that we haven't changed, is slightly higher than what the actuaries had calculated that what should go in. And so that has effectively acted as a risk mitigator to potentially, if we don't hit our investment returns. The alternative would be is we could lower our investment return target, which would drive the liability number up, but it would also drive what's called the actuarially determined contribution up. But when we do our modeling and look at that risk, even with what the ADC would go up to, it's still at or below what we're currently charging employers. So I know for some of you that are worried, are we properly funding our plans? We're very mindful of these short-term issues that may exist, and we believe our funding policy does the job in mitigating those short-term risks. If and when we start to think that things tilt in a way over the long term, we do review and look at this every year. We'll make changes as appropriate. I want to give a shout out to our investments team over at MPERS as well. We've been collecting and accumulating the savings since we merged the organizations together. That's kind of now plateaued out now at about $408 million of hard documented savings on a net present value by us combining the assets together and getting economies of scales with our money managers. The other thing that our investment team gets to do is the board sets the asset allocation strategy, but then they give the staff ranges to work within. And so the staff is able to take small tilts within the asset allocation policy and slightly underweight or overweight certain asset classes. They also have the ability to pick managers. And so the idea is to find the better managers, ones that perform better than average or better than the market. And so cumulatively since 2012, we've been able to document and know that our team has delivered $780 million of incremental investment returns by the decisions that they've taken versus just the policy targets that the board gave them.
I was gonna wait till he was done. If that's okay.
There's lots of different ways to show performance return numbers. There's different ways that I put back in the appendix, but the one that I believe is the most meaningful and insightful is this one on slide 11. Looks kind of complicated, but just to explain it a little bit, it's what we call a cone chart. That solid dark line that kind of runs through the middle represents ongoing 6.75% rate of return. So that's that smooth. If we were to actually get 6.75%, exactly that number year over year over year, that's that center line. So we strive to get returns that stay as close to that center line as possible with the least amount of volatility or risk, as it's called. And that gold line represents what we've actually done. And so as you can see, we've been hugging and staying pretty close to that solid middle line. I will give some credit to staff, but I can't give complete credit to staff because the nature of the markets over the last time period since we've implemented this strategy, the volatility's been down across all things. And so that's been a contributor to the dampening of this, that we don't expect that necessarily to continue going forward. But just to illustrate still though, what is embedded risk in our plan, even though we're much lower risk than many of our peers, we still have risk. And that's what those outside bands represent. That one outside, that first outside cone, which is the lighter blue, is a 1 standard deviation, which means we expect 68% of the time that our portfolio would be within that range of numbers. And so you can still see, given historical numbers of how markets have performed over decades, that there is likelihood and probabilities that we will live within the size of those cones, which can be sizably up or sizably down. I do have a slide because we, even though we talk a lot about defined benefit, I just want to highlight that we also do provide defined contribution plans for our members, and increasingly so. And just to highlight that there has been a change in participant behavior. If you go back to 2007, a vast majority, 76% at the time, of the assets that our member invested were in this thing called the guaranteed fund. It was a wonderful thing. We were guaranteeing members high single-digit returns, and rightfully so, a lot of people put their money there. However, it was discovered and highlighted through the market downturn that those fixed rates that were given to members were being subsidized by employers, and the employers were taking on the risk of being able to hit that number. So there's been an ongoing program now for multiple years that did involve the legislature, at which first internally to MPERS, we dialed down the risk of that guaranteed fund, which then drove down the rate that we were providing members. And then we finally took the step of taking that program where members can annuitize their defined contribution monies with MPERS, and that has now been transitioned to a third-party provider, MetLife, so that our members are now getting market rates for when they do annuities, but are doing so in a slightly advantageous way because we're able to negotiate an institutional rate with them and essentially cut out the sales commissions that are collected when somebody goes and buys an annuity on their own. A couple slides on the teacher pre-96 plan. This next slide is a bar chart that represents the funds that are in what we call the pension stabilization fund. The new accounting terminology for this is what's now called the fiduciary net position. These are the assets that now back the liabilities of that fund. And as you can see, the size of that fund has been holding steady at about $3.5 billion as we would have forecasted and projected. The next slide then is a version of that that kind of walks you through the mechanics and the numbers of how that teacher pre-96 plan works. So each and every year we have benefits that are going out the door, and that's what that top line represents. Now we're at about $1.2 billion going out the door for those benefit payments. The next line is a general fund appropriations line. That line by definition is growing at 3% year over year. And then it's the difference between what the state appropriates and what we pay out that then comes out of the pension stabilization fund, which is that amount withdrawn line. But then the pension stabilization fund, because it does have assets, has money coming in and out of it. There is still the $30 million of lottery that goes into it each year. We invest that money so we'll have investment gains and losses. And so it's the net of everything that takes you to the net position of that fund, which is now approximately $3.7 billion and forecasted to kind of hang around there for a while. I'll have my next slide will kind of show you the dynamics of what's happening with that fund over the long term. This next slide then is that picture of the teacher pre-96 plan. I think this is the picture that's been around for a number of years that many of you may have seen before. The total curve represents the total payments going out the door each year. The blue represents the state appropriations that are being used to cover those payments. And then the difference between the blue and the top of the hump is the red, and that's the money that comes out of the pension stabilization fund. And so as you look at the characteristics of this fund, we're in a period by which we project that, say, around 2026 or so, the liability payments coming out of that fund will peak. That'll be about the time that appropriations will equal about what goes out the door. And so we'll go through a time period at which appropriations will go down as the money goes out the door, goes down. And then we forecast to hit a period out there at about 2037, 2038, where there will be enough money now in the pension stabilization fund to cover 100% of the remaining liabilities in that plan, and essentially it becomes 100% funded, and if everything happens as is assumed, there would be no future state appropriations needed. The next slide is the pension relief fund that I talked about earlier. This is that fund that helps the local units of government out. This is just the eye chart to show all the ins and outs of that different fund, in addition to general fund appropriations of the $145 million that we've put into the forecast. There's another $30 million of lottery that goes in to support that, as well as a portion of alcohol and cigarette taxes that support it. You have about $200 million going out the door. If you look at what's going out the door, you can see that this plan is essentially crested and is just gradually decreasing over time. Moving away from the financials and just talking about, we have a number of ways. We have lots of metrics that we measure ourselves by within the organization. One of the things that we participate in is a global benchmarking exercise. We'll report all of our data to a third-party global benchmarking firm that compares us to all of our peers, not only in the United States, but around the world. And this is just one summary slide. This is a quadrant chart. And so what this is meant to represent that if you see the crosshairs, if we were average cost and average service compared to our peers, we'd be at those crosshairs. And the place that you would like to be in is the upper left-hand quadrant, which is where funds are that are considered higher service level than their peers, but at the same time being lower cost than our peers. The boxes of the different colors represents the trend that Emperor's has been on now for the last, I believe there's 7 boxes that are on there. So if you go back to FY13, Emperor's has been an outlier compared to our peers, where we continue to, while at the same time reducing our administrative cost per member in our defined benefit plans, we're also decreasing costs while we're increasing service by the way that they measure service to members. So this is something that the organization is very proud of. We think we have about another 2 years of things to get opportunities to kind of nudge us up a little bit, but we are kind of getting to that point of diminishing returns, and so it'll be an interesting time when we get there is to see if the strategy is just to stay course of where we are, or I guess at some point if somebody decides they really want to provide a lot better service, they can spend some extra money to do it. If you decide that you want to spend less money, you can do it, but you just do it at the sacrifice of providing lower cost or lower service to members. The last slide that I want to talk about here today was national trends. Just talk holistically what's going on in other states, because I do believe Indiana is an outlier in a good way. Many of our peers, despite one of the longest bull markets in history, are still seeing their funded levels go down. A lot of that is driven by many states are now starting to recognize and reduce their assumed rate of return. So in my single person's opinion, you have a number of states who have taken advantage of the bull market to take down their assumed rate of return to kind of keep their funded status in the same range. The average of states nationally was closer to 8% in their assumed rate of return. That has now dropped to 7.5%. Again, in our opinion, still high, but then again, you have to understand the risks that they're taking in their portfolio and understand if their numbers are appropriate or not. There's still a number of states that are still recognizing better mortality, people living longer. We introduced those into our numbers several years ago as soon as we knew about them. Many states have a 5-year cycle that they look at this stuff, and even if they knew about it 2 or 3 years ago, they may be just now baking it into their numbers. And then this is an actuarial wonky thing on the third bullet, but this gets into, and there's some stuff you read out there, but for those of you that follow this, a lot of attention on the assumed rate of return, but I can tell you another thing to pay close attention to is how different systems treat the amortization of their unfunded liabilities. And it has to get into whether a thing called open or closed and over what time horizon. The analogy I use is if you have a mortgage, if you're what's called closed amortization and you want to own your house, you're gradually over time going to pay down your debt and you are going to own your house. There are some systems out there where they treated their unfunded liability like a mortgage, but they went out and got a new mortgage every year. They would take whatever it is that they didn't have an equity and refinance it again for that 20 or 30-year time horizon. So they effectively never got to fully funded, but was good in the math to make their contribution rates look lower. And then the other trend too is a lot of states have been moving towards getting away from 30, 40-year amortizations of their liabilities and going more to 20, and we had moved to 20-year amortization a couple years ago in our numbers. Another high-level thing that you're seeing is that when you look at employment statistics across state and local governments, so again, this is generally speaking, not the same story for every state, but generally speaking, you see states seeing increases, modest increases in their revenues, and therefore modest increases in their spending. But in aggregate, they're not spending it on hiring more employees to work in government. They're spending it in other places. And so you haven't seen employment grow in state and local units of government. And so that's maybe a good thing from a pension perspective in that the fewer employees you have, the fewer future obligations you might have. But if you're a plan that is in bad shape and you're counting on all those future employees to pay down your unfunded liabilities, that can be a problem because you have fewer employees paying into a system to cover the unfunded liabilities, and so what you have to pay as a percent of payroll can go up. And so I know our state to the south, Kentucky, is kind of in this position where a snowball of a whole bunch of stuff, including this, have really hit them hard. And so they're seeing their percent of payroll numbers to support pensions skyrocket. You are seeing more employers fully funding their ADCs. Indiana has done a really good job of fully funding theirs historically. Another trend you're seeing is a lot more stress testing taking place inside the portfolios and understanding the stress and events that can take place in conjunction with how maybe the risks that exist within the cash flows that come in. So for example, if the economy hits hard in certain states, what's that risk of what it might mean to the revenue of the state or those entities that have to pay into it? And then how does that translate then into the economics of the pension system? So that give better insights to the investment folks so they can try to mitigate some of those risks better. And then you are seeing increased reviews of COLAs and 13th checks across the country. And with Senate Enrolled Act 373, Indiana's a shining example. And I get calls from time to time wanting to understand what we recently did here and what a great idea that was and maybe how they can try to get it done in their states. So that's the conclusion of my planned remarks, and I open it up to questions.
All right, thanks, Steve. Couple questions. So I'm looking at PARF is funded at 59%, and that's concerning. So my question is, are we not meeting the contributions for PARF?
So what has driven the PARF situation is that there was a number of the smaller funds that were below 80% funded, I think now going back, was it maybe 6 years ago? And so there was the incremental revenue that came into the pension system because of excess reserves. And part of the mission of using those excess reserves was to get those smaller plans up to at least 80% funded. And so there was a chunk of money that went into PARF at that time to get it up to about 80% funded. But what has happened since then is that the prosecutors have been getting benefit increases. They've been working really hard to get their benefits probably more in line to what the judges receive. And so what you have here is a mismatch of timing where they get a benefit increase 1 year, but like we're here today telling you what we think you need to put into the prosecutor's plan the next 2 years going forward. And so there's this lag that takes place between what gets paid in because of the timing of the budget cycle and what may get granted by the legislature and benefit increases. And so we have to gradually make that up over time. So we, in our budget, what we've asked for in our budget is what the actuaries have calculated needs to be put into that plan, given its current benefit structure, to support that plan.
So you're saying in your plan, there's an increase for the contributions for PARP?
Yes, in fact, you'll see that. I think order of magnitude, the appropriations needed to support PARF go from roughly $3 million to $4 million. It's not big in magnitude, but as a percentage, it's a very large increase.
And one more question. So on page 14, on the lottery transfer, you mentioned that that goes into pension stabilization fund. Where's that 30 million lottery transfer go? Maybe I misunderstood you.
Well, so we actually, as an overall pension system, we get 2 buckets of lottery money. One goes to support that legacy public safety plan, the pension relief fund. The other 30 goes to support the old teacher plan. And so that money comes to us. Actually, I think we now get it in monthly increments, I now believe, or quarterly through the state. And those monies are directed to go towards the teacher's pre-96 plan. Now, one nuance that's changed is that with the new COLA bill, the Senate Enrolled Act 373, that money is going to be segregated and put into the bucket that will be used in the future should the legislature want to grant any benefit increases, COLAs or 13th checks. But it's still considered an asset within that fund.
Okay, so you're saying the 30 million goes currently to the pre-96 fund to help pay that down?
Yes.
Okay, and then now because of Senate Bill 373, it's going to be split up?
It's still going to be within the assets of the pension stabilization fund, because even though in 373 it created a separate account, it's an account within the total assets of the fund. So it just, it moved it to a newly established account, but that newly established account is not separate and unique from this. It's a part of it.
But the separate account can go to other funds, though, where currently it goes to the pre-96 only. By splitting it up, it's still underneath the pension stabilization fund asset, but can be used for other funds. Is that what you're saying?
There's discretion in the bill that does give the board the ability to move part of that 30 million to other funds if it sees necessary for the purposes of managing and evening out those buckets across all those different funds for those 13th checks. So for the foreseeable future, the way the mechanics of all the math works, effectively that 30 million will almost all of it will be going to the teacher pre-96. Maybe a small sliver might go to the EG and C fund to help even out what can be paid out as part of 373. There's a lot of math behind it, but.
All right, thank you. Your questions, Representative Porter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to go back to slide 10. In the last bullet you had in regards to the investment returns, and it says internal Empress investment team. Those are people within your office, right?
Correct.
And they are comprised of whom? Is it all men, all women, or who are they?
The internal staff?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a staff of 17.
Okay.
I don't have the exact breakdown of all the different, whether by gender or race, but it is a.
Okay, we deal with billions of dollars, right?
Yes.
Okay, so it leads to my other question. I think I asked this a couple of years ago. I don't think I ever got an answer in regards to the quote-unquote money managers or who you work with outside. And I'd like to have a list of those individuals. There's any of the minorities. These are billions of dollars, and these are minority dollars in there also. And I'm talking about African American. I'm not talking about the paintbrush of minority, but drill down to African American firms, and it's a lot of money. And on the national wide, legislators, particularly African American legislators, are looking at more and more how we drill down. And I think you've heard that request from Senator Taylor and years ago Representative Crawford, who's God rest his soul, and other people. And y'all just seem not to understand from my
Well, I
perspective.
will guide you to slide 39 of your slide deck.
Okay.
We have been tracking it, we have been following it, we do follow it. We actually look at it and review it quarterly, and have provided reports to various legislators over the course of time. But if you go to slide 39, on a total basis, if you look at across minority, women, business-owned enterprises that manage our money, 9.3% of our portfolio is in the hands of maybe Weeby. And then you can see the breakout
let,
of the
let me
minority
explain to you.
to the outside.
See, my packet goes from page 25 or 26 to 46. So I have none of that. I don't. So that's the reason why the question was
Is
there.
that all of them?
Before all that, mine does the same thing.
Oh my gosh, I'm
Keep
sorry.
going. Keep flipping.
There should be a slide that's titled,
I guess that's the 24-hour rule we need to have, huh?
yeah, Emperor's, maybe Weeby Investments. And so on that slide, you'll see a breakout between women, minority, and if minority, which minority across our portfolio.
I don't know. Representative Porter, you done? You okay? Okay. All right. Well, I just wanted to, Senator Taylor had a question too. But I didn't want to interrupt.
Yeah, oh, no, we're okay. I was catching up since things are in the way it is, okay?
So, Steve, the recent money, the recent fund-to-fund manager program, did you guys choose someone yet?
We are close.
Okay.
I'm not in a position publicly to announce because we're still in contract negotiations. So what Senator Taylor's referring to is we have a subset of a program we call Emerging Managers Program, where we purposely try to target high-performing but smaller funds that normally wouldn't get our attention, that may also have a focus within Indiana, as well as minority funds as well. And so that's a subset of this program, and we just recently conducted an RFP for the manager to manage that program, and we're in the final stages of that. And Senator, I'd be happy to share with you the results of that as soon as I can publicly share that.
And the second piece on the administrative side of this, did NPERS recently change the administrative side of this? On a personal level, I've been I try to keep close track of my fund, and the new administrator is not familiar with what the old administrator did. But perfect example is how the program worked before. It seems that the new manager or new administrative person or group that you hired takes a different approach than the old administrative group. And I was just wondering, first, how did you come to the decision to change? Second, how long has that change been in effect? And third, are we going to see any parity in what we used to have from an administrative standpoint? I used to be able to call up, get somebody on the phone. It was quick. It wasn't very, it was very quick. Now, just be quite candid with you, I was on the phone for almost 12 minutes on hold. Then, when I got someone, they weren't familiar with the investments that had been made prior because they just took over. And I was just wondering, is that something that changes and we don't know about it? It just shocked me because I was used to dealing with a different group.
So the background has to do with here is a third-party service provider called a record keeper for all of our defined contribution plans.
Right.
So prior, the third-party administrator was originally Xerox, went through a couple acquisitions, a couple name changes, Conduent. And so we were up for renewal of that agreement. And that previous third-party provider was, at the time that we had contracted with them initially, was a big player and wanted to be a big player in this space. But it became evident in time that as they got acquired by other entities, that providing record keeping within the public sector was not a priority, and they weren't investing the necessary monies in the technology and so forth going forward. And so that put us in a position to go out and put that business out on the street with an RFP. We were due time-wise to do it anyway. And the net result of that process was engaging a company called Voya. They should be well known to you if you've watched any television. I think they got the squirrel, the orange money, and the rabbit and all of that. They're one of the largest third-party defined contribution providers in the country. I would characterize, so we went through obviously a big changeover with them. That was a big project to completely transition everything over. That transition took place January 1st of this last year. There has been a learning curve with their call center staff. We have been very proactively, we got teams down working with them, getting them, continue to get them educated and trained, particularly on the very smaller funds, which unfortunately the LEDC plan being a smaller plan, even though it's big in its influence with the stakeholders, they get very few calls on it compared to the hundreds of thousands of calls that they get on all the other plans. And so we continue to work on training and sub-training a unique set of them to be able to handle the uniqueness of the LEDC plan. And we do monitor and follow their call center performance. Early on, I'll call it was worse than what conduit, but recently they are performing better on average than what the other provider had done. We believe the new provider puts us in a much better position to provide better service to our members because they have a technology platform that we can build off on when you go onto the website to get your information. That'll be much better and continue to get better over time, whereas we were maxed out and actually worried with the prior provider that their technology was not changing and falling behind.
Okay, that makes me feel good, Steve, because I can tell
when you or anybody else on this committee has any issues whatsoever, don't hesitate to let me know because it's this information that we like to hear. We just see lots of average statistics and numbers. And so when there's a particular person that has a particular issue, we love to hear about it.
Well, Steve, thank you for that. But the one thing I would say is familiarity with the prior administrator is very important, especially for those of us who've been in this long term. So they need to become more familiar with the rules as they were set forth in the prior plan. And then with the changes, and a lot of people don't know that the IRS rule change, the U.S. tax policy change has changed some of the rules. So I would just say that they need to become more familiar with that. But thank you for.
I hope to never change one again.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your thorough review. You know I'm one of the ones who would like us to lower our rate of return a little bit below the 6.75. So I appreciate the comments about that and the funding, and I appreciate the impact on the locals. So did you say that Indiana has also adopted shorter amortization periods to 20 years
Correct.
as well?
Yeah, we are essentially for most of our plans now at a 20-year amortization period versus we were at 30 years before.
So that also is impacting the contributions?
Yes, yeah, correct.
So,
Yeah,
and you don't-
Well, I'm sorry, let me just clarify that. What we did was we went from 20 to 30 year on any new unfunded liabilities prospectively going forward.
We went from 20 to 30 or 30 to 20?
We went from 30 to 20.
Oh.
Only for newly created
Okay.
liabilities go forward. We didn't go back and take what had previously been amortized at 30 and jack it down to smooth in the impact of that over time.
Okay, and so is there a place, I don't know if this is a State Board of Accounts issue, is there, I know back in the day when I was on city council, I had concerns about the contributions, and I'm not sure that all the locals, public sector employment and wage growth have been declining in the state. I mean, that's a national trend you're citing here. So my concern is there some notice, I mean, that's their choice, right, to match their, to fund their liabilities, right? There's not, we can't make them, if I'm not correct, right, if they dip below a certain point.
Well, so for the local units of government that participate in PERF and the plans which the board sets a contribution rate, they are obligated to pay that.
Okay, so do they all? I mean,
yes.
how do we, so So is everybody's then plan, individual plan, I mean, the portion for their employees' future retirements, are they all funded at the same rate?
Yes. We
I
are,
mean, percentage-wise, they're all,
correct. We are what's called a cost-sharing plan, where all the local units are lumped in together as one pool of people. And as opposed to, if you really wanted to make us really complicated, you could make us what's called a multi-agent plan, where each of the 1,200 employers would be treated separately and uniquely, and you'd have to do separate and unique actuarial analysis for each and every single one and set different contribution rates for every single one. That used to be the case up until, I forget how many years ago, we actually engaged the legislature to talk about the pros and cons of being multi-agent versus a cost-sharing, and it was through that process that we got the ability to move to a cost-sharing plan.
okay, so I guess that was my concern. I thought, and maybe this is when it's changed, I know that's a cost sharing, but I didn't realize so everybody's, you know, the locals, their public safety, their employees they're all funded at whatever the 90-some percent it's gonna show across the board. No one has dipped to 80, 85. You know, my concern is we've had some school districts whose funding for their own school budgets, and I'm just concerned that there might be some municipalities who also are playing a little fast and loose in terms of,
So each employer pays the same rate for each of the plans that they participate in. There's some cities that may participate across multiple plans,
yes,
and so they may pay a different rate for each of the different plans.
Right.
But they will pay the same rate that all the other local units of government that participate in that same plan pay.
okay. And so then, my other question was, with respect to the RFPs you put out, which is maybe a little follow-up to the other questions there, for the money managers, do you look at, because you're looking not for an individual, I mean, you say a money manager, but you mean an entity as opposed to the individual, and we know they move around. So how long are their contracts for?
So in our procurement policy, we have no more than 5-year contracts with anyone, and have the ability to re-up with somebody beyond 5 years, but no longer than 10, without doing a full open RFP.
And then the flip side, do you have the option to get out if,
Absolutely. Yeah,
In
we can
5
fire,
years.
we can fire a manager at any time.
okay, thank you.
And do on occasion.
And then finally, with respect to the state of Indiana, and I do appreciate, we definitely are one of the leaders in terms of being responsible funding and also having one of the lower rate of return anticipated, but has our statewide employment, and you can get me the numbers later, and our statewide wage growth, I'd like to see if it's expanded, maintained, or decreased. State employee,
At high
not
level,
state.
through the demographic information that our actuaries get on how many employees work, it seems like it's stable. And I think in the appendix, you can see the breakdown of active versus retired and the different categories for each of the separate funds in the appendix. So you can see some of the trends within there. However, we are starting to see a small trend because now now local units, to me, have unprecedented flexibility on what they can do with their retirement plan for PERF employees, for example. They can have new hires just go into a DC-only plan if they wish. They can have them just be our traditional hybrid, or they can give them a choice. They can choose to match or not match. So with respect to PERF local units of government, they have unprecedented flexibility now for their newly hired people going forward.
Any other questions? All right, thanks, Steve. Next is Dr. McCormick and Department of Education.
we're popular. Absolutely. Good. Chairman Mishler, thank you for having us this afternoon, and committee members, it's our pleasure to be here. Doc Brown, it's good to see you. We are super excited to see you back, so welcome back. We're going to jump in and get started, but before we do so, I would like to introduce our team that is here with us. So I have Tracy Brown, who is our CFO for the department. Melissa Ombres here, our Director of School Services, our School Finance, and is a wealth of knowledge. And I also have Marcia Bugala, our General Counsel, is here as well. We would also like to start out by thanking Jason, Andy, and Neil with the Budget Agency. They have been super to work with us, which makes a big difference to prepare for today. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started and jump into some things. Maybe. On the screen, I'm just going to remind the vision and mission of the department. We won't spend a lot of time here, but our strategic plan is built upon our vision and our mission. We are also aligned to the governor's plan for his pillars, which also is supportive of our vision and mission. Our identified goals are now on the screen. We have identified those, again, very much in alignment to the governor's initiatives. We are looking at literacy, STEM, and then college and career readiness. We also lump a lot of career tech into each of those areas. You have copies of this, but this is just a screen to show you what the top of this would look like. We went through and looked at our midterm accomplishments as aligned to the governor's initiatives. Those are by his pillars. That is not all inclusive, but we wanted to let the governor know what efforts we have made from the department. Many of you have already received these. We just wanted to make sure you were provided with a copy so that you too are well aware of some of our celebrations. We're going to jump in with our biggest asks. We were asked to present just those areas that we had a change that we were recommending. Obviously, tuition support is our biggest change, so we want to start there. We are asking for 3% each year, which equates to about $212 million and $214 million and $221 million over the 2 years. Obviously, we have worked with a lot of different people on this particular request. We know tuition support doesn't equate to a 3% increase across the districts because a lot of that depends on the formula, which I know you're all aware of, and enrollment, a lot of factors, but we feel this is moving in a good direction. I also want to mention in this area where we are struggling and asking for, I know times with revenues, it's always a question, but at times when that tuition support is questioned, I would like to refer back to a conversation about our SIG monies, which is our federal monies. The reason I'm bringing this up is because those monies are distributed via the ESSA plan, which was done with the input of stakeholders across the state. We were in preparation to distribute that money as per the ESSA plan. We had some of our legislators and our State Board of Ed get involved with that. In short, many people felt like our schools who are struggling the most need a lot more money than they're getting with the current tuition support. So they made us distribute those monies based upon their request, not our formula. They got permission from the feds to do that for 1 year. What that equated to is we have some schools getting $10 a student and other schools getting $2,600 a student. You can tell from that gap it is enormous, but the only reason that happened is because we had legislators who got involved to say those schools who are at most at risk cannot get better if we don't have that type of support. And that is $2,600 additional dollars per student, and we're asking for that 3% increase. Curricular material reimbursement, this is for that free and reduced number. Obviously, that's going to look different per each district. We are asking for $50 million, an increase of $11 million from where we are, but just something to take note of. Currently, we had an ask of $69 million, so we're still short of what is being requested, but we thought $50 million was moving in the right direction. Again, we have many of our districts that participate. No school is 100% for the textbooks. Some are for our free and reduced meal program, but overall, we are asking for the $50 million for both years. And again, we had $69 million that was claimed in 2018. Non-English speaking programs, this is an area that not all of our schools are as impacted. When you start doing a comparison, some are obviously impacted more than others. We are asking for an overall increase in this program. This is to service our students who speak language as a second language, or English as a second language. We right now identify 284 different languages, so that is an increase. The amount of students that we're servicing is also increasing. We have about 8,000 that are eligible for, 8,000 students who are eligible for the bonus increase, and about 16 corporations. In 17-18, we had 55,000 students who were identified as EL. And again, that population for many of our districts is continuing to increase. We are asking in that area an increase from $300 per student to $450 per student. About 1,965 schools, 90% of our schools are reporting. Something of interesting to note, a lot of our virtual programs, which I know is getting a lot of noise right now with our virtual schools, there's a difference. A lot of our virtual programs are servicing our students who are identified as non-English speaking students. Our next ask would be in the area of STEM. At your seats, you are provided with a breakdown of this budget. So although we're asking for $10 million each year, you have a copy of what that $10 million would look like. We provided that in your packets. With this ask, this goes back to the governor's initiatives. It will all roll into, we had for the first time an Indiana STEM plan, that we had a STEM council per the governor's request that developed that. It's broken down into 3 areas, as you can see: professional development, STEM curriculum, and the partnerships. To date, we have trained about 8,000 teachers in e-learning with the current funds that we have been receiving. We're about over 300 for computer science. We're piloting about 9 cyber courses with another 20 coming on. We have been partnering with several of our partnering vendors to get those costs down to schools or at a very low cost. So this is obviously a big increase for us, but the need is there. When we opened up our STEM acceleration grants, we funded them. We had an unfunded ask of $9 million. So the urgency, the need is there, but yet we have to have the funds to meet some of those. We have already distributed our first rounds of STEM Acceleration Grant, which we've been communicating with the governor's office on the where we are with the outputs of that, and we just now named the second round, so we will be watching our return on investment for those. Special Education S5, these are for our most at-risk students. A lot of times these students are serviced out of district, and they are placed in services that sometimes are out of state. They're obviously, it's a very expensive program, but we're basing it on student need. Right now, we have, since 2015, there have been about a little over 500 students who have been serviced. Obviously, that number is fluid based on need, based on what students are coming in, based on graduation and mobility. That is an area that we have been short on in the recent years and have tapped into our special ed Part B monies. Keeping in mind our special ed Part B monies, our schools rely on that, so when those monies become volatile, then we're in trouble. So this S5 is a big expense, but again, it's servicing our most at risk. We're asking therefore just a slight, I say slight, but a slight increase of $5 million each year. The testing is an interesting area, as I know many of you are following and asking really great questions about our testing. For this number, we did the best we could. Some of it is also on projections. You have grad pathways coming through. You have a change of your sophomore tests coming through. All of that plays into these numbers. But what we did is looked at what we know firm, what we are going to need from those state dollars, and obviously there was an increase. So we have $12 million that's right now being spent for iStep 10 and an ECA that's still into practice. We have $14 million for iLearn and iRead, which again, as a reminder, is 3.8. And then $500,000 for a license to look at the comparison of rigor that has been requested from some of our General Assembly folks. and then our early childhood K-2 that is mandated for our special ed pre-K, and we're looking at it for K-2 alignment for iLearn into the 3-8 piece. That is at a $2 million. So all of that together is at 28.8. I will have to say that is including one assessment for a high school student. So depending on what the state decides to do, that could be very expensive if we agree to start paying for multiple high-stake tests for high school students. So this is the number based on today, but that is a very moving target from the State Board of Education and frankly from our legislators right now. So, but it's $28 million ask today. Advanced placement would be for our advanced placement tests that we partner with the College Board. This is really how we pay for in certain areas for math, science, and English for all grades 11 and 12. The goal is to help promote some of that college and careers in the areas of STEM and English. It is a huge cost savings to our families, as if they take the test, there's no passing or failing, but there is a number equated with that. If they get a 3, 4, or 5, usually they're in pretty good shape by having universities, at least in Indiana, accept those for different reasons for particular credits. But we have many of our districts, our students leaving with sometimes half a year of higher education under their belt and some with many more. But our AP is, our testing numbers have gone up. The last 3 years, we're still, you can see the numbers there from 77,086 to 88,225. Again, that represents a savings to your families and your communities because it is paying for some of those college credit hours. It also is helpful with the rigor piece. So advanced placement is an area when you start doing a comparison to dual credit or advanced placement, districts have some really tough conversations there, but AP is one that is kind of the gold standard for rigor. So we are asking for additional dollars there. PSAT goes right into alignment with our testing needs. Right now, we have 85% of our districts that offer PSAT. Depending on what our state does for the high school exam, right now it just says it has to be a nationally recognized college admissions exam. Depending on where we go with this will also depend on what happens to PSAT participation, because whether we go SAT or ACT would play into this. But currently, right now, we're using the PSAT to drive AP potential, to drive curricular needs, instructional needs, to help drive that schedule. Many people are using that for placement into some of their math programs. So the PSAT, although right now not mandated, is a test that most of our districts find of value. A lot of our communities and our students also find this of value. The PSAT also has a lot of free resources through the Khan Academy that our students find very valuable in getting those numbers up for the SAT or ACT, in addition to just their performance in their high school courses. As a participant in PSAT, we have access as a state to the Khan Academy and all that entails. The Khan Academy is also now providing a great deal of resources for the advanced placement, as well as the PSAT. So we do have an increase here based on just sheer number. We think that 85% participation will hopefully get to 100% based on need. But again, some of our districts, it's not mandatory, but depending on where we go with that next level of high school exam. Teacher appreciation grants, the TAG, many of you were here when that went into its inception. Right now, just so you know, we surveyed the field for the first time. 88% of our teachers who responded say they were unsatisfied with their salaries. And I think it's important to note that some of our districts, this is the only new money they see. So this is not a bargainable money. It is usually a stipend that is not put on a base. But for many of our districts, this is only the new money that they see. Just so you know, in Indiana, between the first and 5 years, we lose 35% of our teachers right now. So in a time where we are struggling to get them in the pipeline, we're losing them as quickly as we're getting them in. So 35% loss is an issue. That's why we went out and started asking them questions of why are you leaving the field? Not why are you switching districts, not why are you changing states, why are you leaving the field? So 88% of them responded with salaries. Additionally, teachers who responded with an interest in leaving the profession, they said their number one pay was the number one reason communicated. In 1819, 97% of our districts actually distributed TAG, which requires them to have a policy. The prior year, we were in the low 80s, simply because of a lot of miscommunication at the district level about a policy, which is not hard, but we finally got everybody on track. We're now at 97%, which I think does, again, show that that is of importance to our districts. Special ed preschool funding, pre-K funding, I'm sorry. I know this is an area since 1991 that has not increased. Many of you have been around since that time and understand that that $27.50 per student is still there. I would like to bring it to the attention of the amount of students who we service over the last, or since that 1991 has increased 200%. Many of our districts with 13,000 pre-K special education students being served. That is a huge, I mean, it brings opportunity and it also brings some cost concerns. That is an area that we did not get specific on asking for a specific dollar amount, but just so that you have an understanding on what some of those numbers could look like. If we went from $27.50 to just $28.88, we're looking at about a $1.8 million increase. So we know we're not going to get up to the amounts that are shown on the screen for the other areas of disability for those students who are already K-12 plus. But just a slight increase, we understand, would be about a $1.8 million per year ask. But again, we've had people tell us, you know, that's it would take a 22% increase to reach the dollars to see the other areas of eligibility, knowing that's probably not realistic and knowing the revenue issues. We were just looking at what would maybe be more realistic. But again, we did not put a specific amount on. We were just asking for any increase at this point would be appreciated. Summer school is getting tricky, which I think is a good thing for the state to celebrate. What we did this year is because we had a $22 million ask for claims, clearly we didn't have the funds for that, so you're turning people away. Something for all of you to think about as we're looking at workforce development. Many of our summer school asks right now have to do with career tech ed. Because we have equipment that is idle, because we have the interest that is there, we have the workforce that is saying ramp it up and run it. The concern is we have no reimbursement for our schools, for summer school CTE once we hit a threshold. We took as much money as we could out of funds that were available to the district to the state to reimburse to the districts under a leadership dollar amount to try to get some of those programs ramped up. But again, the positive is our schools are listening to workforce, they're being responsive, they know what we need to do, but some of that is directly impacting workforce and what's available. So as you are having a lot of decisions, not just for the Department of Education, this is an area to keep in mind. That is not a high expense for our return on investment that we could get in some of our certification and credentialing that we're talking about if we could run some of those programs in the summer. So again, we had a $22 million ask this last summer. We were $4 million short. Drug-free schools, this is an area that I know we need to work with. We are working across agencies. We just put our first state social emotional learning plan together that we're getting ready to roll out. $36,000, I will be honest with you, you can only imagine how little of money that is for the state. It pilots very few schools for a program that you question if it's worth the $36,000. We are asking for either an increase of that so we can get some model pilot programs going that people are asking about for prevention, targeting our most at-risk county areas where we know there is a huge concern. We know there's a lot of work being done in the state in this arena, and we are happy to partner with, if they have resources that maybe could be better tapped into, that we're not opposed to that. But I just wanted to put this on your radar to say this is an area of need for the entire state that I think with a relatively small increase, we could get some pilot programs moving. There are some trainings that are required right now in this area, but we don't feel that's, given where we are, we don't feel that it's adequate. But again, we know there are other avenues and other ways that we can get some of these monies, and we are willing to do that as well. So that would be the drug-free schools. I know we covered a lot of information, kind of gave you the meat of what we were requested to give you. I know I'm out of time, but I'm happy to do what Chairman Mishler would wish us to do with questions.
So back to I guess I call it ELL. I guess you've now changed it to EL. So ESL, ELL, now EL.
The government.
2 years ago, we increased it and we created that, we'll call it a 3-tier. There was a base, there was the 5 to 18% and the 18% and over. So I know you're just requesting additional dollars, but do you feel that that tiered system works if we put enough money into it?
I think the schools who are impacted, I believe there are 3 corporations that are at the highest tier, and then 57 additional districts are at that next tier. And Melissa has to correct me if I'm wrong. So we appreciate those extra dollars for those schools because those populations are so much higher than some of our districts. So I do think that's a good thing, if that's what you're asking me, to keep those dollars
I guess
the
I'm
way it
asking
is in the
if you want us
formula.
to continue doing a tiered system to help the most severe in the ELL population. Okay.
Yes.
Any other questions? Senator Taylor?
Mr. Chairman, Dr. McCormick, I want to take you back to one of the slides. Not actually a slide, it's actually one of the reports you gave us on the pillar 3. And you has in here that you got a $59 million grant to support high-quality charter school programs. Where'd that grant come from?
The grant came from the USED, the United States Department of Education.
Now, in doing that, it says that you emphasize the needs for transparent accountability. Could you explain to me and the members of the committee what you mean by that? I'm trying to get an understanding of the difference between the transparency that you see in the traditional public school setting and the transparency versus the transparency that you see in the charter school situation.
Some of the requirements regarding reporting fiscally, academically, or just some of the reports that the state is collecting, part of the issue when we're trying to make policy based on data, there are always holes. And I would argue the same thing with when you have voucher schools who aren't required to do some of the very reporting. So in order to get that all in alignment, so we are collecting the same transparent information so taxpayers know where their money's going, what's working well, what's not working, I think the only way to do that is to collect the information. And so when we wrote the charter school grant for the USED, we really did tighten it down on authorizers, on transparency of reporting. Now, we have had some people take us up on that. That's not super popular in the charter world, but we are distributing some of those dollars. But we wanted to show that you could have, if we're going to be a state of choice, we have to pay attention to the quality piece. And so that's where we were going. That's where we were going in regards to that grant in particular.
In that grant, have you utilized all the funds yet?
We have not. Do you have a dollar amount on that?
We don't. We're in year 1 of the 59 million.
And how many years is the grant for?
It's a 5-year grant.
Okay. And that being said, I'm sort of interested in the results of that study that you're doing, because I'd like to see what the differences are as well. It seems to me that a formidable or at least robust education, K through 12 education, would include all of the funds or the people who receive money from the state, including the aforementioned virtuals. So are you using this money for virtuals as well to try to entice them to be more transparent?
They are included in that language as well, but
Okay.
we've not had any applications for the virtual piece to date.
Not one?
Not one.
Not one virtual
No.
school has applied for funds.
And it could be a new development, so you could have another authorizer who would come forth with a new application, but to date, we have not had any of virtual apply for that money.
And last but not least, this money is a grant to the school districts who are willing to provide open and transparent information on accountability, the accountability measures that we have in our system right now in the state of Indiana.
For the authorizer as well. It's pretty tight. It's a lot of accountability. We are wanting to do that comparison between when you have choice for the sake of choice and choice with some accountability and some quality guardrails to show what kind of results we're getting. So I know across the nation, we're not alone in this. You know, we look at, and we have traditional public schools that are woefully underperforming as well, but percentage-wise, there's no comparison. So we're just very concerned about just the quality and being transparent in that reporting.
What do you mean there's no comparison?
In performance. Now, it gets a little different too, because sometimes they're held accountable differently if whatever year they're in.
Okay.
So it's hard to do an apples to apples right now.
Okay. All right. Thank you for at least your effort to try to find some congruency in those two programs. I think that's what we've all been looking for, in not only funding, but also in the accountability measures that we're looking for.
Yeah.
So hopefully you get to utilize that entire 59 million of funds. That's a grant. I want to make that very clear that this is free money. The only thing you have to do is provide us with information. Am I correct?
That's correct.
All right.
Something to note, prior to our administration, we were not going after a lot of those federal dollars for grants. We have beefed that up. So in addition to the charter school grant, we just brought in $9 million for social emotional learning grants. So anything that we're looking at some school safety grants. Anytime we're trying to get dollars to come in to help offset some of those revenue concerns for our state, we're being pretty aggressive with going after grants. So I think that's a good move for Indiana. You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of quick questions and a point of clarification. And as we're talking about virtual schools, a question that I have is, could you enlighten me in regards to virtual programs versus virtual schools? Because you mentioned those and said they were not, and I just want to be unpacked on that. I want to make sure I'm clear in regards to those, because we had a lot of discussion on virtual schools from, as you well know, all of a sudden some schools have gotten a lot more pay or more because they have virtual schools.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's getting a lot of attention. I think to note the difference between a virtual school and a virtual program, vastly different. I know we were given the charge from all of you to use the definition you prescribed us, give it to districts and run a survey. We have all that information back on virtual schools, virtual programs. There was a lot of information that was requested from us to gather for you. We do have a pretty solid rough draft of that report that you will get by January 1st. I think it's very timely, so you can make some decisions. I know the state board is having a work session regarding virtual education, virtual programs. They're trying to put a resolution together that I will say our team has taken a little bit different approach to be honest. But something will come from the state board as well. But we're trying to do our homework on not just there are some good virtual programs that I'm afraid are going to get lumped into virtual schools. So some of our credit recovery programs that are very successful in keeping kids on track and getting them through the graduation rates, I'm worried about some of the language I'm seeing that's lumping everything together. Some of our EL students, some of our homebound students, some of our most medically fragile students are benefiting from virtual education. So I think we have to be careful when we're having that conversation. I know a lot of it is the funding piece. I know a lot of it is in the accountability piece that we're having conversations, but you will have a pretty extensive report by January 1 of the next year.
Okay. One more quick question. Also, within your 3% request, is teacher pay included in that number?
It would be, because obviously some of those monies would go into the fund that we're allowed to pay teachers from. Now remember, all that would be bargainable at the local district. So in many of our districts, yes, but I can't sit here and say how that would impact each individual district. But those funds would roll into the monies some of the monies that would be allowable for not just teacher, educator increases.
Educator increases, not just teacher?
Well, you have a lot of.
But you said
Like a
you
school
changed
side-
your word. You changed the word from teacher to educator, so that means it takes in a lot more than just people in the classroom, right?
That's correct.
Okay. The words are important in regards to what you said.
That's correct.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Superintendent McCormick, quick questions. Curriculum materials reimbursement, significant increase. So whether it's textbooks or a virtual program, is this something that each different school district decides what to charge their students or not?
That's correct. And depending on whether it's a consumable or a non-consumable, some districts, very few don't charge any textbook rental, but that's very few, but it is individually decided.
So what else is in there when you say consumables? I mean, if most textbooks are not a one-year thing, so what else are they making
So
some of
our
the
s-
students pay for?
Our state defines that now, so within our textbook program, we could have hardware, you can have software, you can have consumables, you could have a workbook or a textbook. I mean, there are a lot of different things that, an online program that you're trying to get access to your students for. So our definition in Indiana, which I think is a good thing, and it moved us in the right direction with technology. It allows for much more than a lot of states, which we get a lot of calls that they're very envious of how we have opened that up to move some of our programs. But it's very, did I answer your question? It's very inclusive of a lot of things fall in that.
Yes, no, yeah, you did, thank you. Under the STEM appropriation, you said some of the monies would be used if you got the 9 million significant increase for professional development training for both in-service and a pre-service educator. What would a pre-service educator for STEM be?
The curriculum piece or the professional develop, I'm sorry.
Right, it says would implement our statewide STEM plan by addressing the following. Some of the monies would go for professional development and training for both in-service and a pre-service educator. What's a pre-service educator?
So those that are going through their preparatory programs, so we surveyed the field for problem-based and inquiry-based instruction to see who had training in those arenas, which the federal, the state, the local are telling us in order to move STEM, teachers have to have training in those particular areas. Only 15 of our practicing teachers out of about the 79,000 teachers, 15% actually had training in that area. So although we're trying to target our in the field teachers and getting them the training they need and they're asking for, we're also concerned about we're going to chase our tails if we don't hit the higher ed program. Some of them are doing a much better job than others, but we are having conversations with them as well so that they can incorporate some of that training within their teacher prep programs.
Okay, so we're looking at all teachers, not just those who would be teaching STEM?
All teachers.
So the phys ed teacher, the art teacher, we want them to receive problem-based training.
Yes, be all teachers.
Okay, thank you.
We will have to obviously prioritize that, which we are doing now because of funds. So we're leaving a lot of that because we have instructional coaches that cover multiple contents, but it's important that they also receive that training. So we're leaving a lot of that up to our local schools through their planning that they're submitting to us through school improvement. But we know, given where those funds will go, how we will have to prioritize that. You're exactly right.
All right, thank you. And then with respect to, and these might be combined, the advanced placement and the PSAT program, with respect to the advanced placement increase. So I know, for example, well, we'll get to that in a second. So what number of children in these three subject areas, what number of children who take the AP test score and actually use, or their college they matriculate to actually gives them credit for that test?
Let's see, let me see if I gave you the correct answers. We had roughly, in 2018, if this helps, we had roughly 88,000 tests that were taken. The state paid for roughly 58.8, and as far as their performance, we hit about a 25% that got college credit. Does that make sense? Across the contents.
They scored to get college credit, or they actually received college credit?
They
when
scored
went
to get the college credit. That doesn't, you're right, it doesn't equate to that because if a child goes out of state to college or goes to an academy, they don't always recognize those. But in Indiana, I mean, we're fortunate that all of you have passed laws that require our higher ed to take those, not necessarily for their major, they could take them as electives or depending on where the child is attending and what that program is that they're going into. But for Indiana, if they have this type of credit, they are getting them accepted. But for out of state, it's still questionable, or for service academies, it's still questionable.
Well, a lot of out-of-state colleges still accept. My concern is, even within our state, I'm not, so 25%, are you saying of the 58.8 who's 58,800 who took the test. 25% scored a 3, 4, or 5. Is that what you mean?
I believe it was 88,000 who were participating. So 88,000.
Right.
58,000 of those were paid by the state. But of the 88,000, we roughly run about 25% of our students who hit that threshold of a 3, 4, 5.
Okay, so of the 88,000, only a fourth even, have we paid for 58? Only a fourth of the 88 even qualified, but we don't know, it sounds like, if they actually got college credit. Because if you have a 3, for example, in math, having looked at some of the in-state universities, some of our in-state universities take that, some of them require a higher number of a 5. And so we don't follow up to see if they've actually received credit?
We would have all that information. Our in-state colleges will accept the credit. Now, depending on if you're going into engineering, they may accept that 3 differently than if you get a 5, depending on what type of credit that's counted for, whether it's an elective or a directive. So there are a lot of moving parts to that. Whether you're studying engineering or you're going to be a teacher, that could be accepted differently. But you have to take the credits if you're going to an Indiana institution. It just, what those credits account for, public institutions.
Yeah, that really makes a significant difference. All right, and so with respect to then the dual credit, how many of our students are participating in and actually using dual credit, and what does that look like as they're matriculating to a college in
Our
state?
dual credit numbers I don't have with me today, but I can get that information to you. That's going to be significantly higher.
Okay.
So our AP numbers are going to look vastly different than our dual credit. So I can get those to you, but again, that's going to be much higher than our advanced placement numbers.
Okay. All right, thank you. And with respect to the PSAT, I mean, this may show my age, you talk about eligible students in grades 10 and 11. I thought the PSAT was always administered in grade 10.
Many of our schools are starting to run it as early as 8th grade. Now, obviously, they're either picking that cost up or the student is, but we pay for it for 10, 11. Some of that is because of AP potential to determine that, of that AP courses. It also goes to national merit. For our students to be eligible, they have to take it as a junior. And so there are some other parts to that of why they're falling, but it's best to take it, many schools are taking it 9, 10, 11, which is probably best practice, but I also understand the financial burden to that and the time burden to that. But the state is saying for 10 and 11, we don't pay for 9, but for 10 and 11, if your students want to take it during those 2 grades, they're eligible to do so versus our funding. But again, that's for AP potential and national merit scholarship.
Okay, that's right. So the junior year is the one that, in a sense, matters when you're taking the PSAT with respect to going on in the merit and whether you're a finalist, et cetera. But so now we're paying as a 10 because that's what the schools are using for a placement. They don't have their own way of assessing students. So I'm a freshman in Algebra 2 or geometry or whatever, and the school itself can't use my grade. They're going to wait till the sophomore year and I take the PSAT, which we're paying for, to decide where they should be placed in the AP course if they have one.
Potentially. So you don't have to follow those recommendations, but many schools do based on the PSAT performance. The other piece of PSAT, which is interesting, at one point the state gave AccuPlacer, which this is getting weedy, but we gave AccuPlacer for higher education, for admissions to deem if students were remediation free. Now, Ivy Tech, VU, some of those who were more prominently wanting that AccuPlacer have now moved to accepting PSAT. So instead of paying for 2 tests, the state's down to 1, which we think is a good being fiscally responsible. So the PSAT also serves for that. President Ellspermann and President Johnson have been good partners to say, let's get this down to 1. Now VU has some further requirements once you get there, but this serves as multiple requirements for that as well that I didn't bring up.
Right. But then now you have the opposite where BSU now is test optional, right?
Correct. For nationally recognized college exams.
Right. All right. Thank you very much.
Any other questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next, we're going to have Muncie Community Schools. I believe we have President Mearns and Jim Williams.
Morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to provide you with a preliminary report on the partnership between Muncie Community Schools and Ball State University. I'm joined by Jim Williams, who is the relatively new president of the school board of the Muncie Community Schools. This is just I'm technologically incapable of figuring out what to do with that. Sorry. Okay.
Where's that? So go to view.
Can you do it, Sam?
Go to view. And then scroll down to full screen mode. There it is.
Great, thank you. Just a quick overview of our presentation. We'll talk about the systemic challenges that we're facing the Muncie Community Schools. We'll talk briefly about the legislation that provided the opportunity for Ball State to partner with the Muncie Community Schools. And then Jim will talk about the progress that we've made together since July 1st when the new school board took office. There really were three categories of challenges that the Muncie Community Schools faced that prompted the state intervention. And I'm going to talk just briefly about each of those: enrollment decline, operating performance in terms of financial issues, and then academic performance. So over a period of years, as you can see on that chart, there was substantial decline in the Muncie Community Schools, in enrollment in the Muncie Community Schools. Over about a 30-year period, about a 50% decline in enrollment, and just in the last 10 years, a decrease in enrollment of more than 30%. What's significant for this particular issue is that there was a significant number of children who were in the Muncie Community School districts whose parents and families were choosing to send them to another district nearby because of their concerns about the academic performance and the fiscal condition of the Muncie schools. As you can see on the next slide, the operating performance, over about an 11-year period, the school board and the administration failed to take account of that enrollment and failed to manage their expenses consistent with their revenues. As you see, over an 11-year period, they overspent their revenues by a sum total of $36 million. I'm sure all of you are familiar with how the diversion of capital bond proceeds, and that draw a lot of attention, but there was not a lot of public attention to the consistent and persistent failure to manage the revenues and expenses over a period of time. And then third, this is the academic performance. This was the most recent academic performance scorecard that we had last year during the legislative session. And as you can see, what we spoke about and what I spoke about at that time was the declining trajectory of the academic performance of the schools. These were the grades as of the 16-17 school year. We now have the grades for the 17-18 school year, and our concerns about the trajectory were well-founded because now the Muncie Community School Corporation grade for the most recent academic year had actually declined from a C to a D. And what we were talking about was the value of the partnership to reverse that downward trajectory. So now quickly I want to just review the key provisions of what is now House-enacted Act 1315. First of all, the university was given the responsibility to appoint a new 7-person governing board. 5 of those 7 members were to be appointed by our Board of Trustees based upon the recommendation from the university president. 2 were then based upon recommendations from the mayor and the city council. The mayor would recommend 3 people, the university president would then appoint 1 from that 3, and then city council would recommend 3, and the university president would choose 1. They all, based upon the statute, are now serving on staggered terms and are eligible for reappointment. Some of the other key provisions of the legislation is that DUAB would terminate the district's designation as a distressed political subdivision. DUAB was authorized to provide supplementary financial support over a 2-year period, and the school district would be eligible to apply from and receive up to $12 million of an interest-free loan to deal with the capital issues related to the diversion of the capital bonds. Then the legislation provided certain timelines. By June 30 of 2020, the Muncie Community Schools must prepare a comprehensive plan for long-term fiscal viability as well as academic innovation. And then there's an annual reporting mechanism. On October 30th of every subsequent year, the Muncie Community Schools will provide an annual progress report. In the wake of the legislation, the community rallied to support the Muncie Community Schools. I've been in the I've had the responsibility to raise money for institutions and organizations for many years. We raised nearly $3.2 million in the space of only 2 weeks. 2 weeks after this legislation was passed by the General Assembly and signed into law by the governor, we received extraordinary philanthropic support. I've been asked on occasions, well, where were these foundations and banks previously? Well, they were right there in Muncie. What changed was now with the ability to appoint a new school board, these organizations, these foundations, and the boards of these financial institutions had a renewed sense that that investment, that the return on their philanthropic investment would be positive. They did not have that confidence before. We continue to collaborate with the Muncie Community Schools. We put experienced faculty members as professional development liaisons in every school in the district. All of our colleges are finding ways to support this new partnership through our immersive learning classes. I'll give you just one example. A senior level marketing class in our College of Business is doing a market research study for the Muncie Community Schools. Presently, they have very little staff that can support marketing communications. Our students, under the supervision of faculty, are conducting that market research and developing a marketing and communications plan for the Muncie Community Schools. It's just one illustration of the ways in which this partnership goes beyond our teachers' college. We are also providing extraordinary and new support to the teachers and the staff in the Muncie Community Schools. One of the problems that we're all aware of is that sometimes teachers in public school districts are dipping into their own pocketbooks to provide supplies for students. We took some of the philanthropy we received and created a supplies fund. We are also treating all of the Muncie Community Schools employees and providing them with the same benefits that we provide to our faculty and staff at the university. We're giving them scholarships if they want to get continuing education. Those scholarships are equivalent to a 50% tuition discount for up to 6 credit hours per year, and many of the faculty and some of the teachers and some of the staff at the Muncie Community Schools are already taking advantage of this tuition discount. And then we're giving them the same pricing that our employees receive at athletic events and arts and culture events and the use of our recreation facilities. But perhaps the most important aspect of the legislation was it provided us with the opportunity to assemble a school board that consists of people with complementary skills and the diverse experience that reflect the diversity of the Muncie community. For the 5 appointments for our school board, we actually allowed anybody who was interested in applying for those school board positions to complete a simple application. We received 94 applications. To put that in context, over the previous, I think, 10 years, there were about 12 or 14 candidates for school board. And so in this 1 year, we had 94 applicants. They come from a broad cross-section of people in our community and throughout the state. We then reduced that list and then had a public forum that included the nominees from the mayor and city council. We wanted to continue to instill public confidence in this process. So we had a public forum in which each of the candidates, 20 of them there, had an opportunity to explain to the community, to the people that they would represent, what their interest was, what their passion was, and it was a very successful event. And from that, we selected 7 members, and I'm just going to briefly identify them and their background and then turn it over to Jim. The woman in the front row, second from the left, is Brittany Bales. I selected her from nominations from the mayor, from Mayor Tyler. She presently is a faculty member at Ball State, but she is both a Muncie Community Schools graduate and a Ball State graduate, and she's a former teacher in the Muncie Community Schools. She's an education expert with a specific focus in special education. In the second row on the far right is Watasha Barnes Griffin. She was one of 3 nominations from the City Council, and she is a graduate of Muncie Community Schools. She's a parent of a Muncie Community Schools student, and she is the executive director of the Muncie YWCA. In the middle in the back row is Mark Irvin. Mark Irvin is also a Muncie Community Schools graduate and a Ball State graduate. He is a lawyer in a law firm located in Muncie. He is the only person on the school board who is not a resident of Muncie. I know that was an issue, a topic that was debated during the legislation. He lives all the way out in Selma. Then in the first row on the right is Dave Heater. He is also a Muncie Community Schools graduate, a Ball State graduate. He's had children that went to the Muncie Community Schools, and Dave Heater is the CEO of Mutual Bank. Jim Lowe, who is seated second from the right in the first row, is a Muncie Community Schools graduate. He works at Ball State as the Assistant Vice President for Facilities. He has been identified as probably the most knowledgeable person about facilities, both on our campus and in the Muncie Community Schools. He served on the Academic Innovation Plan for the Muncie Community Schools, that was strategic plan that was developed in 2010. In the back row on the far left is Keith O'Neill. He also attended Muncie Community Schools, as did his children. He's now a member of the clergy. He is the founder and lead pastor of the Destiny Christian Church, and he is the vice president of the Collective Coalition of Concerned Clergy in Muncie. And then on the first row on the far left is Jim Williams. He's a partner at Defer Varan. He lives in Muncie, and he serves on the Ball State University Foundation Board. And I'm now going to turn it over to Jim to describe what has happened since July 1st.
Good morning. I'll start with the first day of school, just to add a flavor for the excitement in the city of Muncie. I was at Southview School that morning, which is on South Walnut Street, about 500 students, grades K through 5, as well as an attached preschool. That morning, there were approximately 20 community volunteers from the university and various businesses. 3 members of the school board were at Southview School, and this has traditionally been a school which has faced some challenges. That morning could not have been better in terms of how transportation worked that morning, in terms of the excitement of faculty and staff and administration. As a result of the attention brought to Muncie Community Schools as a result of this partnership, we've had a nonprofit, a major church in the community, adopt Southview and their students as their mission. We just learned last week that the attached pre-K achieved level 3 path to quality, making it eligible for On My Way pre-K, and that makes the 4th school in MCS, which is level 3 or higher, and thus eligible for On My Way pre-K voucher money, which is an outstanding accomplishment for our community. Enrollment has stabilized, resulting in larger class sizes and the need to hire 8 additional elementary teachers. We thank the legislature for the flexibility we had with the board, because within the first couple of days of school, received an email from an elementary teacher at East Washington Academy, Jen Schultes, who indicated that kindergarten class size was exploding and they needed additional teachers. Prior to count day, the board moved quickly with the administration and 8 additional teachers were hired. The teachers responded very favorably, indicating that the reduced kindergarten class size as a result of that made it much more manageable. And as you'll no doubt know, in following up on President Mearns' testimony, the expanding kindergarten class size means we have some students coming back to the community who had previously left, or at least at the beginning of the pipeline, we have increased numbers. Enrollment for 2018-19 is at 5,066 students, a drop of only 48 students from the 2017 count day, and virtually even with the follow-up count in February of 2018. MCS internal budget prior to the partnership projected a decrease of 200 students, and the state projected a loss of approximately 450 students. Governance, we were appointed on July 1st, 2018, and convened a board retreat in the middle of that month with David Day as counsel to us out of Noblesville, the firm Church Hiddle, an education expert, and other former members of Indiana school boards. We did a full day of orientation. At that time, the board determined to hold 2 meetings per month as opposed to 1 meeting, and scheduled meetings at each of our facilities with corresponding presentations from building principals, faculty, and students. We have educational sessions at each board meeting. So thus far, we've had school finance, transportation, school safety, mental health services, and school nurses. In terms of operations, things are moving forward. We have hired a new chief financial officer effective November 13th, 2018. Brad DeRome, who spent 18 years as chief financial officer at Jay County Schools, has spent some time serving as interim superintendent at Jay County. His reputation is well known throughout the state as being a very, very capable school finance officer. Our ability to attract Brad, according to his own statements to us was as a result of this partnership and the board that was appointed, and his assurances that things were moving in the right direction in Muncie. DUAB approved the Common School loan on November 15th, 2018, and the State Board of Finance accepted DUAB's recommendation on November 24th. Our goal is to interview executive leadership candidates with a focus on an individual who can spend the vast majority of their time on academic innovation. In the spring of 2019, MCS faculty and staff and BSU will be involved in that process, and the teachers have been surveyed, and we have those survey results. In terms of academic innovation, curriculum, instructional, and technology audits are underway. The SWOT analysis sessions have been completed, and reports are being generated. Board-level dashboards for academic and financial indicators are being formed. The financial indicators are being adjusted to the new financial reporting requirements to be in place on January 1st, 2019. In terms of academic innovation, we are in the stabilization and strengthening phase of that. That will all be informed by assessment, and focus will be on immediate interventions and stabilization strategies over the next 18 months. With regard to that stabilization, intense professional development is scheduled to take place this summer using those donated funds that came in as a result of President Mearns' efforts. In surveys of the teachers, professional development was listed high on their list of priorities, and specifically classroom and behavior management, and so that is slated to take place in earnest in the summer of 19. High quality, as I've mentioned, high quality pre-K programming is now available on site at 4 elementary schools, and we have some indication from the local YMCA that they were interested in partnering with MCS on delivery of pre-K services, and they are working at former Mitchell Elementary School site to train high-quality pre-K educators for use in the MCS community. Discussions are underway to strengthen career technical education, and we are actively working with Senator Doug Eckerty on this process, having discussions with VU, Ivy Tech, and Purdue Polytech. In terms of academic innovation, the Joint Academic Innovation Council is being appointed by BSU and headed by the new provost. We have scheduled an education summit to be held September 27th, 2019, to focus on innovation strategies, and will be a day of professional development for the MCS faculty. There will be a national grouping of experts speaking at that summit and presenting at that summit. This is in conjunction with our academic innovation plan to be submitted by June 30th, 2020, and hopefully to use that as the basis for our first progress report due October 31st, 2021. Perhaps the most critical aspect of long-term systemic change will be community mobilization and engagement. The university, in partnership with MCS, is hiring a community engagement coordinator and volunteer to act as a leader in that mobilization effort. The Community Engagement Council has working groups underway, and the community support inventory is being completed. As I end up today, I want to say this partnership has resulted in a renewed sense of hope in the Muncie community. We have improved morale with the administration, faculty, and staff, and visible excitement in the city. We have broad support from the business and nonprofit sectors, and I can go into greater detail if needed. But at this time, I do, on behalf of the community, want to say thank you to the legislature and the state for taking a bold visionary step and moving this partnership to the forefront. So thank you.
Any questions from the committee? Senator Taylor.
Sorry, I have a whole lot. First of all, Dr. Mearns, let me first of all commend you on a great presentation and what you've done so far. I find your dedication to this project to be very sincere, so please don't take my questions to mean that I don't respect your sincerity. But I want to talk about a couple of things, the academic performance that you put up. First, you talked about the Muncie Community School District now is a D evaluated school?
Yes, sir.
What's your, so in 2000, we're not going to ask you to report back until 2021, which I think is a long enough time to make changes. Do you expect that grade to be better by then?
Well, I think what Mr. Williams said is they're presently doing an audit of the programs.
Right.
That will give us a sense of where there is strengths and where there's opportunities for improvement. I
Right.
think it would be premature and probably ill-advised for me to make a prediction about what the grade might be in 2021 or 2022, but I believe that the process that the school board has put in place to develop that plan should produce improvement. But this
Well-
is a long-term project.
Right, and I think every school should be evaluated every 3 years, and not every year, like you're getting, right? You know, public schools get evaluated every year. And I've always said that academically, to take a year-by-year assessment is sometimes not as efficient as spreading them out. So I'm glad you got that opportunity to look at your evaluation after 3 years. The second piece is, going back to House Enroll Act 1315, you got a $12 million interest-free loan from the Common School Fund. Now, if I remember correctly, when we created the Common School Fund, that was supposed to be for schools to borrow money. And as far as I know, no school has received interest-free until this. If, please, the charter was a prepayment for unexpected costs because it was a new program. But has there been any other school system receive a zero interest loan?
I don't know, we'll have to ask.
Please do. This is the point I try to make, and respectfully, I'm glad Doc Brown is here today because he did take part of my recommendation when we talked about this privately, because we know what the $12 million is going to be used for. It's for those capital improvements that the individual, not the school system, decided to use for other things. But the $12 million is zero interest. I'd like to know what the cost to the state of Indiana is for that, because the Common School Fund is supposed to be a loan program. The interest-free is not a loan; it's a grant.
No, the loan, the $12 million will need to be paid back. It just doesn't need to be paid back with interest. So the lack of interest, yes, is a grant or a gift.
Okay, all right.
But the 12 million, it's a loan, so $12 million will need to be repaid.
I agree. It will be paid back, but I don't know what the term is, or I don't know if you're going to do a balloon. I have no idea. But my suggestion was for the state to wrap, which would have cost the state nothing, to wrap and give a letter of credit for you to borrow that money. But that's fine. The other ones, the local philanthropic, great job. I think you should be commended to have all of these people come forward and these community foundations to come forward with $3 million of funding. That is a tremendous achievement. So I want to give you a lot of credit for that. Thank you for looking into that. Last but not least, you brought up something, and I'm glad you brought this up. You had a situation where your teachers complained at the beginning of the school year that they had an overabundance of students versus teachers. So because of 1315, you were exempted from having to produce and come up with a different process to hire new teachers. You were able to hire, correct me if I'm wrong, 8 new teachers just because you were exempted from it.
No, any school could have hired 8 additional teachers.
Right, but they,
With the flexibility the House Enroll Act 1315 gave to this board was to act on it quickly and to give direction.
Exactly. So
So,
that's what I'm saying.
correct.
There's a process. There's a process that other public schools that have to go through that you don't. And this is what I brought up in testimony. If we're going to, and I really want this to work, but if we're going to sit here and compare apples to apples, then we need to do that. And it's unfair, although it's a great idea, to give you that ability, in my opinion, and not give that same ability to our traditional public schools. They should be able to do the same thing that Muncie Community Schools has done to address their teacher needs when they see an academic year and something that they couldn't predict comes up. So I hope that this legislature, in the next couple of years, we do the same thing, and Dr. Burns has done you guys have done a great job at Ball State to establish a pattern moving forward. I hope that you are successful, because then we will have a clear understanding as to what we need to do to make public schools successful. I just hope that we have the same mentality and same decision-making to give it to traditional public schools that we gave to you. So great job. Great. I'm commending you. I'm saying great job. I don't think I need a response. I'm just saying if you are successful,
I was going to agree with you.
We have a blueprint for what we need to do. And when we get that blueprint, I just want that blueprint to be passed along to our traditional public schools,
And
because that's part of what we should be doing.
Senator, and I think that's the wisdom of having this annual reporting, is that we all can learn from what innovations are proving to be successful, and so those innovations can be shared. I think that's the...
I agree, and thank you for the creativity and the exemptions that you have, because now we know which ones are good and which one can be eliminated, and then public schools are going to be better off because of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Point of clarification. The dollars the $12 million that you guys that you got in regards to zero interest, charter schools, I think it was the last budget was exempt for paying back from this common school funds, like $71 million. And just for a point of clarification, and we put in a budget, I think Dr. Brown, between Dr. Brown and Senator Kenley, like $80 million that charter schools were forgiven forgiven those loans. So, I mean, that's fact, it's there, it's documented. So that's just a point of clarification that I recall from a few years ago. One other quick question is that on page 3 of your slides, you had, they closed 2016, 2017, Muncie Community Schools closed Stoner Elementary, which had an A, and Mitchell Elementary Schools that had a B. Can you tell me why that happened, or did they combine them, or what?
No, all of those schools were closed. Those were closed sometime in the 2016, 2017 year, well before this partnership took effect.
Okay,
they were closed as of last spring.
Okay, so that's basically, you're just giving us some documentation on, like slide 3, that they were closed, and you had no part of it, of course not.
Correct. That preceded the new school board.
Okay, and so no one knows why that happened. I mean, you show it. Somebody needs to explain it. If you show it, show your work.
Okay. No. Okay.
Yeah, those schools were closed under the prior administration by Dr. Ball as cost savings and consolidation matters. When it became clear that the financial house was tumbling, those closures, Storr, Mitchell, and Sutton, took place as a result of that financial reality.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, just one more. I think the governor, our governor, has like $35 million, I do believe, in regards to school safety at 3%, that schools can borrow, but they have to pay the 3%. So, you know, he put it out there from that perspective. So, you know, here we are again, we picking and choosing who we had to pay back interest versus not, but that's just a fact. I just want to keep the facts out there. I'm not casting shade, as the kids say, but I want the facts to be known. Some people, or some school corporations, have a little bit better advantage than others.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. It's great progress already. So I just want to make sure I understand. So there had been a $10 million bond that should have been used for capital projects, wasn't used. And obviously, those projects, those needs are probably amplified, they're still there. So the 12 million loan, 9.5 is going into those, to actually do those capital projects, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and so what's the additional money going for there?
9.5 is going into the capital projects to ensure that, and those have to be either obligated or underway by July of 2019 to ensure that those bonds don't become taxable. We have pending litigation. There are 3 or 4 matters that were pending prior to this board taking office. One of those involving retiree health insurance is significant. There is a draft settlement document that
Can I just ask, when you say significant, I'm gonna assume is significant as in not being funded?
yes,
So that's, okay,
yeah, and so that's somewhere between 1.2 and 1.3 million additional there. And then in terms of the flexibility granted by the legislature on academic innovation, the rainy day fund is 0, is another area. So those, I think I was at 10.5 million, so there's 1.5 million that is in there remaining.
okay, thank
And
you.
go ahead. We do have to, with DUAB, send in vouchers. It's not, $12 million has not been extended and deposited into MCS accounts. We have to submit vouchers, and those have to be reviewed by DUAB.
So as you're doing repairs?
Correct.
Basically submitting bills, okay,
Correct.
got that, thank
Almost
you.
like a construction loan.
Right, and then with respect to the 3 million, now it looks like almost $4 million you've raised in that foundation. I mean,
Correct.
that you've raised, what is that, what are those monies? Are they earmarked for anything in particular?
Some of them are earmarked now. The community, ONB, Old National Bank, their dollars are going towards the Community Engagement Volunteer Coordinator. Some of those dollars from Ball Brothers Foundation are going towards the intensive professional development this next summer and the innovation. We have other dollars going towards ongoing support of teachers. So those are some of the examples of where they are right now. Others have not been earmarked. And we are
Okay.
continuing, that's where we are right now, but we're also continuing to raise funds from other community partners and have some significant potential for additional gifts.
All right, thank you, that's significant, and that's important. And then in terms of, and I appreciate the support you're giving, treating the MCS employees as your own, as they are now, but how are you, because this clearly, and I don't know, I should know, because we reviewed your budget, is this part of your overall budget? How are you absorbing these expenses?
So the employees at Muncie Community Schools are still on the payroll of Muncie Community Schools. What we're doing is giving them a benefit.
Right,
So for example, if they're taking advantage of preferred pricing, they're
Yes.
simply purchasing tickets to athletic events at the discounted rates that we offer to our employees. With respect to the discounting or scholarshiping for courses, again, it's a discounting off of a posted price, and so it will essentially be absorbed as part of our budget, but it will not be material. We think it's a significant benefit for the MCS employees, but it will not have a material impact on our budget to provide that essentially tuition discounting.
oh, that's great, thank you, that's all.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you for just a follow-up question for my, and this might be for Jason or somebody who's in the budget office. Could you please provide me with the loan document for that zero-interest loan? $12 million, I need to know what the term and the amortization is on that. And I'd like the agreement as well. And then a question for the,
Doing that, I like everybody get a copy of it, if it's possible.
unless you want to just add, yeah, and then the second piece is the original $10 million, Senator Brown brought up a good point. The original bond issue was for $10 million, if I remember correctly. And it was supposed to be paid back over a 7-year period of time. Am I correct on that? Can someone answer that for me?
Senator, there is an amortization schedule, and I believe there is a balloon payment after 7 years.
Okay, so obviously there was some type of budget that was done by the former Muncie Community Schools to pay that back?
There is a repayment schedule that I believe is part of the loan agreement I signed.
Okay.
Provided the signature page to DUAB within the last 10 days.
Okay, so you're going to make that same balloon payment still?
Yes, the repayment schedule is set forth in the agreement. I don't have it in front of me, but there is a balloon payment.
I'm talking about for the original bond issue. Or was that, correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I heard, is that original bond issue was actually refinanced?
No, the original bond issue has not been refinanced.
It hasn't?
No.
It hasn't been restructured at all?
It has not been restructured.
So there's going to be a balloon payment in 2 or 3 years? I thought the loan was like 4 years ago.
Senator Taylor, maybe Jason can, he's
Oh,
probably
I'm
the one
sorry.
probably has the most knowledge maybe of this issue.
Okay,
Jason wants
go ahead.
to address that.
Sorry, Senator, I'm trying to pull up the document. The State Board of Finance met as noted in the presentation and reviewed the application, or reviewed the resolution, and documentation was provided in that public meeting regarding the amortization schedule for the repayment of the $12 million. And because of Muncie School Corporation's debt structure across the board, DUAB recommended and the Board of Finance approved. Typically on a common school fund loan, you have an exact amount every month, the same amount every year for 10 years. Because of the structure of the outstanding loan that was mentioned of the 10 million and this 12 million, there was some different amounts due. And so like for the first 3 years, it's a certain amount. For the next 3 years, it's another amount. And for the next 4 years, it's another amount. I have an unsigned copy of it, but I'll ask the Treasurer's Office to submit that. But that has a breakdown not only of the amortization schedule for the $12 million, but I believe there was supporting documentation provided that showed the debt structure for all of the debt outstanding for Muncie Community Schools, leases, the original 10 million, and shows that common school fund loan and how that would be amortized. I don't know the answer to the question about the restructuring of the 10 million, but I can ask the Treasurer's Office to submit the signed copy to give to the members of the committee.
And I would imagine that those original or those early maturities or early terms would be the lesser amounts, right? And then there would be.
Yeah, I
okay.
think it's like maybe 300,000 a year, and then it bumps up to maybe 500,000, and then the third tranche is maybe up to 700,000 or 800,000. But I'm trying to pull it up right now, but I'll be sure to forward the final document and any associated documentation that was available at that meeting. It is public information, so the treasurer has the documentation as well.
Okay, just as long as you get it, and I think Representative Porter asked that every member get it. I want to make sure that I look at that, because the reason why I'm looking at that, just for full transparency, is because I believe that is a very creative financing piece. I want to give you credit for putting something like that together. I think Doc Brown had a lot to do with structuring this new financing, and I just hope that we keep our eyes open and our ears open for future school districts that come forward and need some relief in their finances, that we do the same thing for them too. So I think it's a creative way. It was something that I talked about a long time ago. I would have done it a little differently, but then I leave that up. It's probably above my pay grade, but I think it was creative. I want to commend you on it, and I just want to make sure we keep our minds open for this budget year coming up to make sure that other school districts have the same opportunity. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, so we're a half hour behind. It's 12:30. We were originally going to break for an hour. That would put us a half hour behind this afternoon. So I will ask for the will of committee. We can break for a half hour for lunch, or we can break for an hour and just be an hour, half hour behind at the end of the day. Half hour? Is that what everybody wants? All right, so we'll be back here at 1 o'clock. Thank you. I guess that's a recess.